A common comment on car review videos is that we spend far too much of our time reviewing top spec variants. The reason we do that is usually to show you all of the available features because nobody likes looking at a blank switch. But I take your point, and that's why I've brought along the Cupra Formentor V today. This is the base model Cupra Formentor and easily the cheapest way into one of the hottest new SUVs on the market. You've probably seen advertising for this everywhere if you live in an Australian capital city, but the videos always focus on the top of the line VZx, which has copper wheels and 228 kilowatts of power. So when you buy the base model Formentor V for $55,000 drive away, are you still getting the soul of this Barcelona brand? Well, in today's video, I'm going to answer that question. We'll take a look inside the Formentor V, check out the backseat and the boot, and then we'll hit the road in this 140 kilowatt base model to see what this vehicle drives like. And hopefully you can already see behind me, it's got smaller alloy wheels, chunkier tires, so ride quality is a focus. But a spoiler alert is that the chassis on this SUV is still awesome. But is it the variant to buy? We'll find out. Hit subscribe first, now let's make a start. Finished outside in asphalt blue, which is actually a no-cost color, this is as cheap as a Cupra Formentor gets. This car has no options fitted to it, but I actually don't think that's the right way to go, because at $54,990 drive away, the interior feels a little bit basic with these cloth manual seats. But you can spend $2,750 more to get the leather and power package, which makes the upholstery leather. I personally am not that huge on leather, but it's going to be easier to clean up if you've got kids. But more importantly, you also get electric adjustment for the driver's seat, which is a nice to have, mostly because you can actually get your under thigh seat adjustment a little bit better than it is with these manual seats. There's a bit of a tidbit. So that would make the Formentor V just under 58 grand drive away, and it does become more competitive with rivals like the Mazda CX-5, Akira Turbo, perhaps not quite as lavishly equipped as that car because you don't have premium stereo, for instance, but it's kind of in that ballpark, I guess. But in my opinion, it sort of makes the Formentor VZx, top of the range car, look like great value at 66.5 drive away, but that's just me. Now, otherwise in the interior, we get a really interesting cabin that doesn't look that similar to what you get in Volkswagen, Skodas and Audis, which are Cupra's cousin brands. We've got a bigger 12-inch screen here. It's a big touchscreen. The resolution could be better, particularly with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which are kind of small scale enlarged rather than a nice big crisp CarPlay like you get in an Audi Q3, for instance. But we do look forward at a digital instrument cluster, which is nice and configurable and clear and inset in a hood here so glare doesn't get to it, which is awesome. The steering wheel has a flat bottom, it's perforated, you get copper stitching and copper detailing, even though this is the base model and you don't get that or much of it outside the car. Air vents here, wireless smartphone charging, decent sized cup holders and lots of odds and ends storage, partially because of this finicky or dinky little automatic shifter, which is very quickly propagated across the Volkswagen Group lineup of cars. Now you can tell you're not quite in a Volkswagen or Audi because there's unlined door bins, for instance, and on the whole, the quality in here feels about similar to Skoda, maybe not quite as nice, but I think that's because Cupra pours a lot more of their resourcing into the chassis than into the nicety of some of the cabin plastics. And for people that are keen drivers, they're probably quite happy with that preference. Now the seats, even though these ones are the base manual cloth seat, they're still nice and shapely, coffin style, backrest. They're pretty comfy. It's just that I'm missing a bit of under thigh adjustment the leather and power package would solve. Also optional is a sunroof, which this car doesn't have, but the view out's good. Big mirrors, decent sized windows, and a nice low set driving position that immediately makes it feel like a sports car. And later, I'll explain how the driving position in the Formentor is so much lower than what you find in a Tiguan. The Formentor drives really like a hot hatch, which is great, as we'll find out in a minute, but the back seat is significantly better than what you'd find in most hot hatches. Compare this video to one of our Cupra Leon reviews, which are available on the Chasing Cars channel, and you'll see what I mean. Legroom is good behind my own driving position, tow room is excellent, and headroom is really generous as well, at least without the panoramic sunroof, which this car doesn't have fitted as an option. So adults can travel in the back without any problem, so kids will be fine too. Even the middle seat is usable. There is a hump in the floor. It's not as bad as some, And you get air vents back here, separate climate zone, 2 more USB-C ports, but lots of lower rent hard plastics here in the back, although the door grabs are still nice and upholstered in blue and copper, so that's kind of cool. We also get a flip down armrest, 2.5 cup holders, you get a pass through as well. This car has standard all-wheel drive, so it'd be great to take to the snow, particularly on smaller wheels that you'll be able to get snow chains over. That's always a benefit. Plus a mat pocket in the backs of both of the front seats. So as back seats go, it's pretty accommodating. I've already mentioned how Cupra's marketing for the Formentor focuses on matte painted VZx specs on big copper wheels. But here on the base V, we've got a gloss metallic blue instead, which actually looks really smart in my opinion. But because the Cupra badge is painted in black, it is kind of hard to see it from behind the car. So you've got to know this new Cupra badge kind of well enough in order to identify it out on the road. But you still get this full width LED light bar even on the base model, which is a great touch. But at 55 grand drive away, a manual tailgate is a little bit less impressive. At least it gets out of your way quickly, and for most people, it's not a big deal. 420 litres of boot space is what you get in the Formentor. We call it a mid-size SUV on Chasing Cars. To be honest, it's on the cusp of small and medium, but it's got the length of a mid-size SUV. Now we've got a ski pass-through, we've got remote releases to drop those rear seats down, which is awesome. And then underneath this boot floor, we've got nothing. I think you could actually get a spare back there if you got kind of like a humpy rear floor or something, which might be an accessory in some markets, but the way it's running here, we have no spare. We've got a tire repair kit instead. Closing the boot is nice and easy with big grab handles there. Cupra has really sweetened the running cost arrangement of the Formentor to help give it a good kick in market. The first 3 services, covering 45,000 Ks of driving, are free, which immediately makes this a lot cheaper to run than something like a Mazda CX-5 or a Volkswagen Tiguan. Fuel consumption is fairly decent. We've been able to get about 9 litres per 100 Ks out of the Formentor V in mixed driving. And of course on the highway it's a bit more frugal on mandatory premium octane petrol than that. The warranty for Cupra in Australia is 5 years with unlimited kilometres. It's interesting looking at the Formentor outside because they just look fast, but particularly at the higher end of the range, whereas here in the base model on those smaller wheels, does it still give you that sports SUV experience that the Formentor promises? Well, let's find out. Still gets off the line pretty tidily, though without the kind of exhaust rasp that's produced by the top-end VZx, which I am running as a long-termer at the moment, so I feel quite familiar with it. Some of that's just pumped into the cabin artificially. The Formentor V is definitely quieter, but it still uses the same basic engine as the VZx, and also the VZ model. It's the Volkswagen Group EA888, an engine that we see a lot of here at Chasing Cars, and it's used in a lot of Volkswagen Group products because it's good. It's a very long running engine, it's tried and tested, it's a 2-litre, it has reasonably good fuel consumption, and it makes good power. Here in the Formentor V, it's tuned to 140 kilowatts of power and 320 Newton meters of torque. So it's a good serviceable amount of power, but nothing crazy. Importantly though, it's been paired to a 7-speed wet clutch DSG rather than a dry clutch unit. Not only are these more reliable, but they also tend to work better out on the road. Their shifts feel snappier, they do less weird things, and that's the way it goes in the Formentor V. It feels like a pretty kind of warm SUV to drive, but it's actually the chassis which is most enjoyable. The powertrain works fine, but the chassis is really great. Firstly, the weight is actually kept in check in the Formentor. It's not too heavy, and you sit nice and low to the ground. In fact, it feels more like a raised station wagon than it does an SUV, and there's a very good reason for that, which is a little bit nerdy. Most Volkswagen Group SUVs are actually based on a sub-platform of MQB. MQB is like what sits under a Golf or a Tiguan, a sub-platform of that, which is like a Volkswagen Tiguan or an Audi Q3, so it's SUV aligned. But Cupra, when they were making the Formentor, they actually asked to use the Golf sub-variant of MQB. So that is a passenger car version of the platform to sit close to the ground. So it looks like an SUV, It's still got a bit of ground clearance, but it's actually the Volkswagen Golf MQB version, not the Volkswagen Tiguan MQB version. Hopefully that makes sense, and that's why it handles more like a low-riding car than an SUV. And from my perspective, that's a very good thing, because you still get to look like you're driving an SUV, but from behind the wheel, it handles like a proper car. And that starts with great steering. The steering rack is quite quick. It's going to feel a lot quicker than you're used to if you're coming out of something like an Audi Q3 or a Volkswagen Golf or Tiguan. It really turns in quickly through the wheel, and the front end just follows because the engine is light and it's been pushed as far back as they can get it. And you might have noticed, design-wise, it's got quite a long nose for a car with a transverse engine. That's to try and get that engine further back so that we get better dynamics out of the car. The chassis itself handles well. It's got adaptive dampers, so you can dial in a bit more stiffness if that's what you want. But even in the car's normal mode, it's still really, really balanced. Good compliance, good control, and better bump absorption than other Formentors, because we've got 18-inch alloy wheels and nice chubby tires. So here in Australia, we've got a lot of potholes, particularly in Sydney with all that constant rain we've been having for what feels like about 3 years. The roads are in a terrible state, so having a bit of extra rubber in the tire really helps you, makes it less likely you'll get a puncture, but it also makes the car ride more comfortably. And given that the Formentor V still handles well, that's a really nice blend to come through. The big difference between this and a top-end Formentor is that you've just got to work the car a bit harder to keep the momentum up, because it's just got less power and torque, but similar weight because the Formentor V still has all-wheel drive. The Formentor VZ, which I haven't driven yet, is an interesting one because it's got 180 kilowatts, but only front-wheel drive, which is fascinating. And then there's the Formentor plug-in hybrid, also front-wheel drive, but that gives you about 50 k's of usable electric range. And at the moment, it's actually the Formentor I've liked best because it handles well too, but it really lets you cut your running costs very, very quickly, and your environmental impact too. As for safety features, we've got AEB, reversing AEB, adaptive cruise, lane keep assist, and blind spot monitoring, though you can't get a 360-degree camera on any Cupra Formentor, which is a bit of a shame. At the start, I asked 2 questions about this car. Firstly, does the base model Formentor V still have the soul of this great sports SUV? And secondly, is it the right variant to buy? Well, there are different answers to those questions. It does still have the soul of a full-fat Cupra Formentor, because that's actually in the chassis more than it is in the engine. It's still great to drive. It's a bit more of a momentum car because you've got to keep up the lower powered engine a bit more to keep it on the boil, but it drives great. But I don't think it's the right variant to buy. At 55 grand drive away, it's less than $12,000 cheaper than the top of the range VZx, which has much, much more power and verve because of its more boosty engine. There's also the plug-in hybrid, which is about the same price as the VZx, which could be a good proposition if you do most of your driving in the city and want to lower your carbon footprint. And then there's the VZ, which I haven't driven yet, so I can't really comment on. But I would probably save up a bit longer or spend a little bit more to finance a VZx or a plug-in hybrid over the V. That being said, for people that do a lot of country miles on pockmarked roads, this spec on smaller alloys and chunkier tires would be the right way to go for you. Those are my opinions. I'm keen to know yours. Let us know down below in the comments. We try to get back to as many as we can. Hit subscribe if you're not following already, and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.